Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. You're listening and perhaps watching the EdTech Situation Room for May the 17th, 2017. Good evening. My name is Wes Fryer, and I am happy to be joining you from Oklahoma City, where tonight we do not have severe weather. We had a wild night last night in western Oklahoma with tornadoes that I don't know what they were rated, but they were like 70-mile-an-hour winds and lots of excitement. And I think we have another round coming tomorrow evening, and it's May in Oklahoma. But I am the director of technology at the Cassidy School and am excited as always to virtually be at the feet of the Yoda of EdTech, Jason Neifert in Missoula, Montana. How are you, Jason?
Good evening, Wes. I'm well, thank you. And I guess since we do like to talk about the weather in our neck of the woods, it snowed in Missoula, Montana this morning. So we woke up to some initially pretty slushy snow, and by 10 a.m. this morning, the ground was covered at the University of Montana. So I am joining you tonight from Missoula, Montana, which apparently has interesting and diverse weather, where I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school that's housed on the University of Montana campus. And so lots going on in the world of technology. It seems like once we get to April, May, June, we start to get a lot of announcements. And Wes, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off this week what I think the big headline is, which is that Google I/O Developers Conference is going on in California this week. And there was a couple of keynote addresses today where Google announced a number of new and interesting initiatives. Now, I did watch most of the keynote address this morning, which involved project leads and Sundar Pichai, the leader of Google. But I thought maybe we could talk about some of the big changes today and talk about if it has any real impact on EdTech. So let's start with first that Google has been relooking at kind of reprioritizing what they're developing around. And one of the things that Sundar Pichai said today, that Google will be looking at all of their products as a means of delivering more artificial intelligence to the end user. And in fact, they're reprioritizing artificial intelligence as a core part of the development philosophy. And interweaved throughout the many product announcements today, and there were a number of product announcements today, that there is a big data, artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence theme to them that seems to kind of schedule a shift maybe between what Google had been doing and what Google will be doing in the future. So as an example of this, Google Search will be taking on a new logarithm that puts in some machine learning as part of its intelligence, which it's interesting to me because I would think that the logarithm that has driven Google Search for the past 17 years is somewhat of a machine learning product. Other examples is that Google Street View will automatically recognize signs now, so that they'll be taking data from the large number of what I'm assuming are high-resolution photos taken by the Google Street View cars in order to attempt to draw better maps and give better directions. And they also announced machine learning to drive how the phones interact with one another. For example, in video calling, they would start adding machine learning algorithms to the results of things like video calls in order to better tune them in real time for low bandwidth or low hardware requirements. So before we get into other specifics of the Google announcement today, first, Wes, were you hanging on your screen today at Google I/O?
No, I wasn't. I knew that this was coming, but and I've been reading the rumor sites as we do, but I was not. So I'm thankful that you were. And Ben Wilkoff is in the chat room. I just got our live chat open and want to encourage anybody who may be tuning in live now or in the future, definitely check out our live chat. And Ben is also an avid Googler, so I was not. I will admit that for many Apple events, I I stand with bated breath and, sometimes watch live. But Ben says he did. Ben, if you want to join, let us know. We'll be glad to have you jump in. The conversation would certainly be perhaps a little bit more informed on the other side of the aisle, as it were, because I can certainly comment on things, but I'm not in the know about all the latest. So.
Well, let's start with a couple of different interesting ones. First and foremost, I have not made this transition, but it was very clear to me today that Google is really wants to replace the notion of Google Now, which is what we were calling a lot of the kind of smart intelligence services. They really want to rebrand that entirely as the Google Assistant. And so it's going to be hard for me. And as I mentioned in the past, I have done some academic research in so-called intelligent personal assistants. So it's a topic that I have some background with from a research standpoint. But the bottom line is that it's going to take me a while to get rid of this notion of Google Now and think of it as the Google Assistant. And the Google Assistant is available on all new-ish Android phones. Like, for example, this is my one-year-old, I forgot the fancy of the phone, Moto G4 Play Edition, which is the phone that I carry around now. It's one of the cheaper Amazon phones that you can purchase. I like it. It's a great platform and great product, but the Google Assistant is available on here. And of course, as I've demonstrated in the past, I have the Google Home device, which is sitting in my kitchen. Now, there's been interesting updates related to that we can talk about in a moment, but Google Assistant is really what all this is under now. So as an example of this, they announced a new lens feature in the Assistant service that will tell you basically what you're looking at, right? So you can open up a camera in the Google Assistant, you can point it, take a photo, and it will analyze that photo using its machine learning algorithms to tell you more about that. And the examples they used today were, I want to know more about this restaurant. So you take a picture of this restaurant, it recognizes, I'm sure, because of the extraordinary database of Google Street View photographs that they have, and will tell you more about that. And I think that's a really interesting thing. It's not new. You may remember that Amazon, when they first introduced their Amazon phone and the Amazon app today, you can take pictures of products with the Amazon app or the UPC code on a product and get to that on the Amazon store. So it's not that highly unusual, but it's an interesting phenomenon that they're going to be introducing machine learning in that way. Does that tickle your fancy at all, Mr. Fryer?
Oh my gosh, it does. And we saw Sunchar Pichai, the CEO of Google, reveal these cards. I think was it last year at the I/O event? Because they talked about artificial intelligence really being the centerpiece of their strategy. So I don't think this line of announcements is at all surprising. I do want to talk about an article from a Microsoft event that touches on this as far as AI and surveillance cameras and the future that we're glimpsing, which we can talk about a little bit later. So, I almost want an Alexa Dot, the small one. I was at a luncheon today and they were giving it away for a drawing, and I was kind of wishing, that I would win it, but I was telling our assistant tech director who I was with that yes, that would mean every conversation at our house would be recorded and Amazon would have that. So, mixed feelings, but I think that Google, we really need companies not to be evil with all this, I guess, is one of my thoughts, because the power and potential of all of these things to be used in all kinds of different ways is just stunning, and the pace of this and how quickly this is happening is just going to continue to cause all of us to reel, because none of us are going to have enough processing time.
A second major category announcement was the amazing numbers that Google released based on its user numbers. There are now more than 2 billion active Android devices around the world. There are 500 million active Google Photos users. There's 1.2 billion videos and photos uploaded to Google Photos every day. And Google Drive has 800 million users, and YouTube watchers watch 1 billion hours of YouTube video every single day. And I found those numbers to be extremely striking, particularly the 2 billion Android phones, because that makes it, easily the widest adopted platform on earth. So very interesting.
When you think about that quantity of content, a statistic from our presentation today, which was it was about database tools and things that increase visibility for managing databases. But the statistic they shared was that 92% of the information that humanity has been created in the last 2 years, which I hadn't heard that before. You hear these things bantered around about how many minutes of YouTube, is uploaded every minute. And one of the biggest things about this in terms of the quantity and the size is video. And I think I shared a statistic I tweeted last week about the number of surveillance cameras and how that's what that is predicted to balloon to, just this unbelievably crazy number. I'll pull it up here in the next 3 years or whatever. Video content is absolutely exploding, and the only way that we're going to be able to process that is through machine learning, is through artificial intelligence and these algorithms. No one has time to watch. I mean, on YouTube. YouTube surveillance video, it's staggering. I don't think our schools are positioned and poised to be recognizing this and embracing this, right? Video has become every bit as important as the printed word, if not more important. I don't know. We could probably have a debate about that. But we've got to process it with machine learning and with AI. There's just no other way to get around it. So Ben is asking what version of Android are all those phones running? That's a great question, because unlike Apple, which has seen pretty amazing adoption rates when a new version of either the iOS mobile operating system comes out or the desktop version, it's pretty quick on the uptake. Android is much more fractured, and that certainly poses challenges for developers as well as for cybersecurity. So which of these announcements excited you the most, Jason, just from everything that you heard today?
Well, I think I'm very excited about the intelligent personal assistants taking on more functionality. They did a really amazing demo today saying that more services and apps will be plugged into that infrastructure. And they showed off an example where someone using a voice conversation with the verbal assistant was able to order lunch for delivery and then pay for it using Android Pay that accepted their thumbprint as the signature. The whole thing took 30 seconds and didn't involve any typing at all. And I think that notion of having a connection with your device is pretty important and pretty impressive. I was also extremely interested in two other announcements. One of them was they would be offering an API that allows developers, Android app developers, to access some of the machine learning assets that they have available at Google. They've open sourced some of these tools for the purposes of allowing developers to access those things, and I think that could be super cool. The other thing they announced, the next version of Android is called Android O, and at some point they will assign a dessert name to that, but right now, since they've decided, or they haven't decided yet to announce which dessert it will be, it could be Android Oreo, it could be Android Orange Slice, it could be Android Orange Soda, I guess, to use the orange theme again. But Android O will also be going with a new side project that's called Android Go, that's intended for very low-end Android devices. And by low-end, they mean ones with single or dual-core processors, ones with a gig of RAM or under. And the idea is they want to encourage developers to develop applications that keep in mind users that may have low-end hardware or small amounts of bandwidth. And in fact,
think developing world, think India, China,
exactly.
vast swaths of the planet.
Right. Well, and it's funny because I downloaded a couple of the light apps developed by Google and the one by Facebook that are intended for users in new markets that may be getting vastly underpowered devices. And to be honest, in some cases, I prefer those to their more full-featured apps. The Facebook one is a wonderful example of that the Facebook Lite app, which you actually have to sideload into your Android phone, which means you have to hack it a little bit to turn on developer options to install it. But it's faster, and it works much more nicely on I don't have a low-end phone by any stretch of the imagination, but it's better with the low-end app. And YouTube Go, which is their other low-end app they've previously made available for low-end phones, the interface is not as nice as the YouTube one, but does allow you to queue up and download videos to your phone that, you can then utilize that service to keep something offline to utilize when maybe you don't have bandwidth. So I think those two announcements together probably mean the most to me as an end user.
Well, I have been dropping some links into our chat, and we want to let everyone know that you can access all of the links for our show, as well as things that we will likely not have time to talk about at edtechsr.com/links, where there's a Google document. And there's a lot of connections and linkages here to announcements that Google is making and AI with cybersecurity, with hacking, with a whole host of different issues that touch us at a personal level as well as an enterprise level when we think about our schools and our organizations. And so while it is exciting to think about AI and right, we have personal decisions to make about this, right? Like Jason has the Google Assistant at his house. I have Siri, here on my phone, but we haven't yet jumped into either the Alexa or the Google Home world. And even as you describe these things, Jason, I'm thinking about how my level of excitement is obviously lessened by the fact that, I've got my iPhone here, and I've dabbled with the thought of whether to try the Pixel and to, jump into Android, but we're very invested in the Apple ecosystem. And so, while we're Chromebook users at school and my wife has a Chromebook, and anyway, just, love Google and I'm invested in there. It's interesting how, and I didn't watch the Microsoft event either. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So these are exciting announcements, but I guess that's a connection to the classroom and the school in terms of where we're invested, where we've sort of put our eggs. But I think that we do want to be open to all of these possibilities and carefully consider, when there might be a time to change, and if we need to reconsider where we have invested ourselves, whether that's on a personal level at home and in our family, or if it's something that we're doing at school. So I want to talk a little bit about I think we could probably talk the whole time about Google I/O, and I think Ben may jump into our chat here a little bit, and so we might circle back to some of this. But there was also a pretty big Microsoft event, and the article I want to point to is from Popular Mechanics, actually, on May the 10th, and it's called "Here's a Chilling Glimpse of the Privacy-Free Future." And then the subtitle is "The Computers Are Watching." And I'll read the first paragraph. Imagine if you lost your keys, and instead of fishing around in couch cushions, you could just pull out your phone and search for them. Just a quick textual query with a quick response there on your desk, you doofus. This is not only possible, it's possible now, and it's almost as intriguing as it is terrifying. And so this was on May 10th at the Microsoft Build Conference for developers, similar to what Apple does with WWDC that we'll be seeing again in June. And they've got a video, which I'll include also in the show notes, or the links for the show, as well as all embedded in the post. And it's called Build 2017 Workplace Safety Demonstration. And so with artificial intelligence and the ability to identify, okay, this face is Wes. Wes is certified to use the drill press. He's not allowed to, use this other piece of equipment or whatever. Video is going to be able to determine literally down to the second, if you've got coverage over your work area, everything that your people have done, if somebody who's not authorized to use a particular piece of equipment has used it or not. In a hospital circumstance, it may be able to do amazing things as far as monitoring, patient vitals and other kinds of statistics, being able to tell who's coming and going. But one of the points of the article is, and this is a refrain that you have heard over and over if you've been a listener to our show, that the ethics of this is very important, and that we don't want people and companies to be developing these things in a vacuum, pretending like values don't matter, privacy isn't important, and regulation isn't important. Because one of the things that they talk about is how things are so quick and are moving so quick, and of course, government and regulation always lags behind. And sometimes that's good. I'm not saying regulation, it'll all save us. But I definitely will say that there are important places for regulation in the marketplace. And in the case of AI and surveillance and where we're all going with this, I think it's really fascinating because just like with, I might mention a CRISPR article a little bit later, in the world of genomics, in the world of biotechnologies, we are seeing exciting advances that, for instance, are going to continue to open doors for folks who are disabled. At some point, we're going to be able to replicate the human eye, I think, and do things visually. That's one of the things that we haven't done yet because of all those neural connections to the brain. But with prosthetic hands, with the ability to, control things neurologically, move cursors, there's tremendously wonderful things that are going on. But there's also, a tremendous potential for these tools to be utilized in fairly negative ways. So those are some thoughts. Welcome, Ben Wilkoff, joining us from lovely Colorado. Did you get snow this week as well, or this week, like yesterday again, like they did in Montana? Or are you guys?
We are waiting for snow tomorrow, so we will be having our snow. And actually, it sounds like it's started to rain/hail at this particular moment in time, so all kinds of good stuff. The late May snow is an interesting one for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I know you've been putting kids to bed and other things, but let me throw it to Jason first to kind of respond to this Microsoft article, and then let's hear some of your thoughts about the I/O event, Ben. Any thoughts about the privacy-free future that we're rapidly moving into, Jason?
Yeah, I just took a look at. I had read another article on some of the things they had announced, but this is the first time I've seen that video, and that video is extraordinary. I would encourage listeners to go to edtechsr.com, grab the link to this, and watch it because it's pretty important, I think, of what we're talking about. But essentially, the video shows, surveillance video in a workplace, which is not an uncommon phenomenon. But it's being analyzed in real time by apparently a series of computers that identifies people by name, it identifies threats by name, it identifies issues with in some cases, workplace safety issues. But this is kind of what we're talking about, that really some of the real practicalities of the technologies that we're talking about, that in a world that has machine learning and artificial intelligence and massive databases of information and sensors can be anything from a temperature sensor to a video camera to a motion detector. These things are going to get aggregated together at some point and identified. It's just an inevitable part of the nature of this technology. And so, yeah, we do want to be conscious of this very much so. And in the same way that things that seem like they're innocuous or even beneficial could have downsides to them. I think last week that I was going to drop this in and I forgot, or maybe it didn't happen until recently. No, it hasn't happened until Monday. But the Apple Watch has been announced as an article from The Verge. The Apple Watch detects heart irregularity with 97% accuracy, which is part of, I think, the secret promise of the Apple Watch that has not really been talked about because it's been what I think would be easily described as a mixed success, although I see way more Apple Watches than I do Android watches out in the wild. But the bottom line is that the Apple Watch seems to have even further application than the immediate connection to your phone, and the health kit and health apps on the iPhone could be a real practical manifestation of this data collection aggregation that we're talking about.
And I'll just say right now, in addition to making a personal choice about whether you want to put a home assistant in your house that very well may be recording everything that's happening, and I didn't put a tinfoil hat on, we joked about that last week, and I actually forgot that. There's a court case right now where that's being tested as far as whether or not they can subpoena the Alexa, it was present when a murder happened, to find out if there's more information. We each need to make careful decisions about the information which we are going to disclose regarding our DNA and regarding our health care. Probably we don't have a lot of choice when we go to the hospital. Whatever system they're using, and your information is going to be in there. But there are things that you can send off, right, to have your DNA tested and to have that sent back and tell you, perhaps some really amazing things. I'm not saying don't ever do that. but think very carefully about it, because if there's anything that we should have learned as a public from the last few months of cybersecurity intrusions and ransomware and elections that have been hacked and all of these different things, it's that security is illusory at best. If someone wants to get that information, if somebody wants to come into your house, whether that's your physical house or your virtual house, and they have the means, which exist, they can do it. And so I think that, I'm thinking a little bit more on the personal lines here when it comes to the biological stuff. We've all got decisions to make. A coworker today showed me his Ecobee thermostat and how he had some other sensors that were really small around his house, and on his app he was able to, see the temperatures and adjust it. And his wife called him the other day and he adjusted the temperature from work, and it was very cool. And I don't know that thermostats are nefarious, but certainly when you think about baby cams, when you think about surveillance systems, and the opportunities, and especially if they're inside your house, we got to think carefully, because this isn't the cybersecurity show. This is the EdTech Situation Room, where we're going to link these things to, educational technology in schools. But we are going to continue to talk about personal connections as well. So just the wary card. By the way, to just distract us here with weather, it was over 80 here, and Peggy George says it reached 90 in Phoenix, which was just a little bit below normal. So there we go with our diversity here. Ben, what do you think about Google I/O? And are Jason and I just throwing a wet blanket on what should be a celebratory Kool-Aid celebration? Let's drink up.
No, I mean, essentially they said the era of mobile is over and the era of artificial intelligence has started. And I don't know that I'm ready for the era of artificial intelligence to have started. And clearly that is the Kool-Aid that they want people to drink, right? The two things that I found most compelling, one was Assistant on iOS. And essentially I started reflecting on, all right, so if all of our kids on iPads, on Chromebooks, on whatever device they have, can literally speak to the ether and be able to ask a series of intelligent questions. So I started playing around with the contextual stuff, right? Like I asked, how far is it from San Francisco to New York? And then I said, how long would it take me to go on an airplane? How about a train, right? Like each one of those questions is more and more obscure in terms of like, if you don't know what I just was talking about, there's no way you're going to be able to answer that next question. And so I started thinking about, all right, so if that is something that's possible in classrooms, and essentially the assistant is going to be everywhere, what kinds of questions do we need to ask that are different than those, right? And, like if they can get that from an assistant, a digital assistant, how is it that our questions can be different? So in that way, I think that there's an interesting component. But the other thing that I found really compelling was the photo stuff. They are just so good at the machine learning with photos and video. It just is incredible to me. The idea of the persistent sharing options inside of Google Photos with family members. Like, I absolutely want to use that idea. If I take photos of my kids, I want my wife to have access to those instantly. I don't want to have to think about sharing them with her. I want her to have those instant access. And it's not too hard to extrapolate down the line where essentially our sharing networks can mimic our real life networks, and it can be easier for us and less, there should be less friction for sharing things that we are thinking about. But I also know that the intentionality of sharing is part of the feature. Like, it's not always a bug to have it be a complicated thing to share it, because then it was intentional. Like, I shared a birthday message on like writing out a note. A birthday message is so much more valuable than the almost automatic Facebook birthday message that happens. And so anyway, I think there is a lot of interesting things that are happening, but they are really hitting hard artificial intelligence. And much like chatbots about a year and a half ago, I'm not sure that everyone is ready for artificial intelligence in everything all of the time.
Where does this put you as a Flickr user, Ben, and a Flickr lover?
A Flickr user. Google Photos has been the default photo sharing tool for the last 2 years for me. There is no Flickr use other than as an archive.
Interesting. And that speaks to this flexibility issue, right? We all become invested in different platforms and different tools. We have baby duck syndrome, which you can Google on Wikipedia, which means, we are impressed like a baby duck to the mama that, hey, I've got to use a smartboard. I can't use a Promethean, or I've got to use such and such. We need to, though, be open to the possibility of switching and changing, not just because it was announced at I/O and it's the latest and shiny, that kind of thing about early adopter innovator. That may be fine on a personal level, but on a school level, I think we've got to be a little bit more careful. But let's not become so entrenched. We're a Microsoft shop and we will only do Microsoft and we just run Novell and we'll never change. Have you ever known someone like that? I could say some names. I won't, but there's some school districts not very far away who I think just finally have let go of Novell. So, that was probably about 10 or 20 years too late. And it's a good thing to, to see the pulse of what's happening. And especially when things are transformatively more powerful, as it sounds like Google Photos is, this is challenging me to think about my own personal photo flow. And on a school note, we had a good session about intellectual property and who owns stuff, and the idea that perhaps you might want to be having an agreement with teachers that if they're going to be archiving photos, they do that within a system that the school has access and control to. And we haven't gone there yet with school, but I'm very glad to see Google Photos continuing to advance. And I'm trying to think about what image is going through my mind when you say, the age. Oh, it's of course Lord of the Rings when, is it an orc or who says the age of man is over, the age of the orc has begun. That's what I'm thinking here about AI. Maybe that's a little dystopian, but
So Ben, let me ask you one quick thing related to the announcement that Google Assistant is going to be on iOS. So I think it's interesting to watch Google and Apple kind of slug it out in regards to the functionality of their phones. Would Google Assistant on iOS replace Siri for you then?
So I use Siri, at least at the moment, mostly for transactional kinds of things. So I need directions to a place. I need you to take a note. I need you to remind me to do something. I need you to set a timer, right? So in those instances, no. However, what it will replace is I use the Google app very often on my phone in order to find information. And so if I can speak, or what they also updated was the ability to use the assistant just by typing in a request, I would much rather use natural language to make a query than to try and come up with the right Google keywords to get to the information that I need.
Sure.
And so I am going to replace, at least temporarily, the Google app and to a certain extent the Chrome app with just using the extension on my phone or the assistant, right? And so for me, that's what it's going to replace. But my guess is in 2 weeks when we see WWDC, there's going to be a Siri kit thing. It's going to be, and these are all the updates, right? And so you're never going to have as much integration with the assistant inside of an iOS device. But at the same time, Apple will never hold a candle to search the way that Google does. That's not what they're trying for. It's never going to be that thing. And so, if I can search more intelligently, that's what I'm going to do.
And let's throw out an article related from Apple Insider, May 13th, 2017. When Apple is 2 years behind you, put your things in order. And what the author is saying here is talking about WWDC, which is coming up in June. Pretty good rumors as those go on the rumor sites that Apple is going to be coming out with a smart assistant for the home, which is going to be a speaker and is going to look a lot like the Google Assistant and Alexa. Here's the most interesting thing, which we've seen Apple not jump first into things, but when
Uh-oh.
We done lost Wes.
Well, hey, I'll jump in then.
Do it, man.
The article from Apple Insider talks about the notion that whenever you're starting to panic about Apple falling behind, that's probably a sign they're about ready to jump ahead of everyone with a lot of savvy and unexpected zeal that you think they may have lost. And of course, it's very popular now to hand-wring about Apple. We do it a fair bit on the show as well. I have largely moved away from Apple devices now, not because I don't like Apple stuff. In fact, I believe that all tech is awesome and is usable and is great. But the bottom line is that they have been what I perceive to be somewhat stagnant. But what the article claims is that when everyone believes they're now behind, they've got a technological lag, but they're probably ready to release the next big thing. And so I wonder if Wes was going to the notion that the next big thing in this context was something in the artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence element. And it's hard to know and hard to say, but it does seem like that Apple is cautiously waiting until it's ready with something. The question is, what is that something? So any thoughts about that, Ben, on what the next big thing might be?
Yeah, because I have the crystal ball for sure. I listen to a lot of Apple podcasts. I listen to a lot of, tech podcasts in general, yeah. Right? But I listen to a lot of commentary, and essentially, I think it comes down to what is the core service that each one of these companies have, and Apple is always going to be device first, services second. Google is always going to be services first, device second. And I feel like there is a sort of coming together of those two things where, and to a certain extent, Microsoft is going to be enterprise first, services second, device third. But anyway, like if I'm crystal balling what Apple's going to do, I think that they are going to continue to ride the privacy train as far as it will take them. And they're going to try and do as much of this stuff on device as possible because their devices are really slick and they can do the deep integration. If and when we get to the Geek of the Week, I'm going to share something that I was able to sort of problem solve as a problem of practice with some of my coaches this week. And it was like, this only works because of the deep integration within a system. And so if they continue to leverage that, I think there will always be, there will always be an opportunity there for deep software services and device integration. And it's just like trying to find that right ratio between those three. Like I'm really wary of this strange marriage of the screen and the assistant. I don't know. Did you guys talk last week about I can't even remember the Android. Yeah, we talked about the
Amazon
news with the look and the show, and it's just like they're like trying to jumble all of these things together in as many different combinations as they can, and it's like, what is going to work for people,
I'm so glad that you guys were here to talk with us. I jumped out and restarted my router. I think I may have to go get a Google Mesh router, Jason. What I was going to talk about continuity, and it sounds like you were touching on it, is that Apple's mastery of the device and the interface. Think about being able to say to your assistant, show me this recipe. I want to see it on my Apple TV. I want to see that on my phone. I want to see that on my laptop, you know, and that's where a continuity thing could come in, because the screen. Oh, and here's a actual news connection to that. Phil Schiller gave an interview just in the last week where he was asked about assistants, and he specifically talked about screens and the importance of screens. So some of the rumor sites and pundits are thinking that this was a bit of a showing your cards for WWDC, and what Apple may be bringing to the table with an assistant is going to be something that leverages the other screens that they already have very much in play on, you know, in millions of hands.
Okay, well, where shall we go next?
Let me respond to Peggy's question. She said, Wes, why would you only want your teachers to be able to post photos on a school system? So this came from a great session at the Atlas conference that Vinny Vrotny presented, and I can actually put the links to the Google Doc of notes from that session. And his was about intellectual property, teachers pay teachers, all the things around rights. When you think about stuff that teachers are creating and whether the school would continue to have rights to those. And I am not saying we're doing this and that I'm pushing this, because I think, there's a whole lot of facets to this, but it's something to think about. That, let's say teachers posted on some website that, you know, you have no control over, and there's an issue down the road with a parent or with law enforcement or with somebody. Let's put the whole legal liability thing in there. There's a lawsuit, you know, involved in that, and your school has no way to directly take those down or have control over that. That is something to think about, and I think that we'll probably see some schools address that. So that's an answer to Peggy there. Am I still good? Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Okay.
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the cyber attacks that we've seen, and the cyber weapons and those kinds of things. Forbes had an article on May 12th, 2017, an NSA cyber weapon might be behind a massive global ransomware outbreak. And certainly, you know, it's just like saying the weather is interesting in Missoula or Phoenix or Colorado or Oklahoma. You know, there was another cyber attack. They're happening all the time. But what's happened with this latest ransomware attack, which I guess kind of started in hospitals in Europe and has spread, you know, beyond, they are pointing to these leaked cyber weapons that the National Security Agency developed and then were released to the public, I think through I don't know if it was through WikiLeaks or who it was, but the back to Microsoft and their event, the president of Microsoft, whose name I have not said enough times to have it roll off my tongue, has a really interesting letter, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, where he is calling for governments to have a Geneva Conventions and to have some agreement similar to what we have with nuclear weapons, limiting the ability or trying to get at the policies and willingness of governments to hoard these things, because the situation, one aspect of the situation here is when governments like the United States or anybody else identifies exploits that can be utilized to compromise systems and to install backdoors and to do things, whether that's like the Stuxnet virus. And if you haven't read about Stuxnet and how probably Israel and the United States did a major disruption to the Iranian nuclear program by making uranium centrifuges essentially overheat and blow up. You know, instead of dropping bombs there, they used a cyber weapon to do this. As governments have these tools and they don't tell tech companies about them in order to patch them, then it potentially puts all of us at risk. And so the president of Microsoft is saying, you know, we need to not have, we need to have more disclosure so that we can patch things. And the other thing that I'll say on that whole situation is, and I don't know that we mentioned this last week. Did we talk about the Windows XP patch last week, or has that happened since then? I don't think we happened
since then.
Yeah. So Microsoft actually released in March a patch to Windows XP, which was supposed to not be supported and have anything else, you know, coming out in the way of updates and security patches because they needed to address this. And so that vulnerability, which was part of this NSA cyber weapon that got leaked, was part of this massive outbreak that we had. So there's lots of aspects to this, and I think maybe one of them also continues to be, what are you running at school? You know, are you relying on tons of local Windows servers? I think maybe 8 years ago we had like 16 Windows servers, and now we're at like 4, you know, with some virtualized servers. But cloud services, looking at Google as our primary email, as well as data, other third-party cloud-hosted stuff. It definitely is. It makes me feel a little more comfortable as a tech director that we're not having all of our stuff right within our network. But there's a whole lot of aspects to these. So thoughts, Jason?
Well, yeah, I think that what you're starting to see come to fruition is that there has always been a lot of holes in all the tech tools that we use, but there's just more folks that are trying to exploit them now. And so, you know, caution is absolutely required here. And I posted another article that's from Lifehacker today, basically saying that it's time to change your passwords because now people are putting together large databases of leaked credentials, 500 million of them in all, with, you know, email addresses, usernames, and passwords. And chances are, and I put the obligatory link to haveibeenpwned.com, which goes through the many released databases of hacked accounts to find out if your email address is among them. But the bottom line is that, you know, this is going to become more and more common. I think the terrifying part, though, is that I think schools will respond appropriately. The discussions I've been either privy to or at the peripheral of, I've felt that people were taking good, smart, proactive steps. I do worry about the average consumer, however, who I don't think is taking as proactive of steps. And there was a pretty funny mock ad on Saturday Night Live on Saturday night about older folks using the Amazon Alexa, and it was pretty darn funny. But it also, I think, highlighted that, you know, this is not an old person, young person thing. It's any consumer that's not paying close attention to this. If you don't understand the device that you're using, the higher chance it is that you could be victim of something, as more and more tools are available for doing precisely that. And if you're using a 7-year-old smartphone on the modern internet that probably has dozens of holes in it that can be exploited, and, you know, we're living in dangerous times in that regard.
We need devices that patch themselves. We mentioned last week as far as these different routers and the ways that they're able to do that. I just dropped the link, Ars Technica, May 15th, 2017, 2 days after the WCry worm, Microsoft decries exploit stockpiling by governments. You know, I'm thrilled that basically our Chrome devices all update themselves, right? In the admin console for Google, we have it selected so that it will randomize. It won't just hit our network like Microsoft patches would do at one time. And I think Microsoft's probably gotten better about that, you know, so that every Microsoft device on your network doesn't try to download the patch Tuesday or whatever at the same time. But that is a beautiful thing, right? I mean, it is going to take a huge sea change to convince me that we do not need to heavily invest in Chrome devices and being able to manage things through the Google Chrome console. And cybersecurity and updates have a ton to do about that. So, Ben, what are your thoughts?
So I have looked at a number of the exploits sort of throughout this process, and actually, my understanding of it is that a huge number of them are due to pirated copies of Windows, right? So no patch that is created is going to, and I shouldn't say no patch, but most patches are not going to work on pirated copies, because pirated copies never get updated, because they never want to ping a Windows server or a Microsoft server. Like, so essentially it is just you're just advocating for the always, always on updates and things like that, which have existed on most systems for years. So to my mind, it's probably not a, Chrome versus Windows versus Mac OS, right? Like, Macs were not exploited. iOS devices were not exploited. There was a pretty large Android hack that happened fairly recently. or an exploit that was in existence within the system. But it's like, all right, this means that you just have to stay up to date, or you have to not connect to the internet. Like you have one of those two options, right? Like either you wall off your systems, which, you know, in North Korea totally works. Like they're not getting hacked because they're not on the internet. But if you want to be on the internet, you have to have updated systems. And I think that is it's a strange thing because it essentially forces you into upgrading software, upgrading hardware more often than you might like to, might force you to, because, right, like even those Chrome devices, after 3 years, they go off support. You know, like that,
Really?
that is a very real possibility.
I don't think I knew that.
Well,
Yeah,
so the end of life stuff is really interesting.
I thought that was just when you threw the device out that you couldn't renew that license. You had to buy it again. Really? It's a 3-year deal?
So it depends on which device you are looking at. But if you look at some of the devices that you purchased 3 years ago, they are already off support in a technical sense. I don't think that there have been any specific instances where large-scale deployments have gone off support all at once. We just got the assurance that our oldest devices are going to be renewed out 1 more year into 2018, but that's going to happen. And so when that happens, you are either forced to take them offline, which for Chrome devices is like somewhat useless, or you are forced to renew your hardware. And
and you just have to look at what your refresh process is.
You
and
just have to decide what is the better trade-off
and build that into your budget. I want to mention. No, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say something. There's a message here that largely for folks that are looking to adopt Chrome devices. You really should not be engaging in a race to the bottom philosophy when buying Chrome devices for precisely that reason. And I just put the link in chat, and now I think about it, I also put it in our notes too. But the other thing that's interesting about this is that, you know, there is a list of when the product will be end of life, and it's a pretty diverse set of dates here, and it seems like that they list a policy on top of that's the case of when that's going to be the case, but I don't really understand, or it looks like that it's somewhat different depending on the device manufacturer and maybe the nature of the hardware. But you know, the bottom line is that if someone comes and tells you they can sell you $100 Chrome devices and they are 4-year-old ARM devices, ARM being the alternative processor, that is very low power. From that standpoint, it's a wonderful platform, but it's slow and isn't great at multitasking, then, you know, you're not getting a great deal out of that. And it's something you should be very cautious of when you're looking at adopting any platform, but particularly, you know, the Chrome devices.
Peggy's asking in chat, is it cost effective to renew your Chromebook license for old Chromebooks after 3 years? I'm not sure you can. Ben's shaking his head.
Yeah. No, you get to keep your Chrome Management Console license for the life of the device, but the life of the device may vary. Yep,
exactly. Yep.
So plan for a 3-year refresh if you're buying Chromes. Yep, that's important stuff. I need to. I want to mention this, and this is related. This is a Bleeping Computer article from May the 10th, 2017. Microsoft has effectively banned third-party browsers from the Windows Store. One of the things that we're seeing with respect to devices is the phenomenon of the App Store, and looks like I'm pixelating. Am I okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And basically how app stores are able to push out updates, and people can update their devices potentially, you know, much more than they could if they just have to, you know, on their computer, go to a website and download or whatever. You know, clicking update or setting auto update, you know, is an efficient way of keeping more people patched. Well, I guess similar to the way that Safari on the iOS is, that I guess it's really WebKit. Even if you run Firefox, it's not truly a whole Firefox browser, and maybe that's true about Chrome. Microsoft is making in its Windows 10 Windows Store browsers it's saying that you're going to have to rebuild and use the same engine as the Microsoft Edge browser in order to have it work. And this would be pretty huge, because this could effectively, break Chrome and break Firefox on Windows devices. And this is ostensibly for security that they're doing this, but it's a pretty big deal. So I don't, from the open web standpoint, and how important browser standards are, and how wonderful I think it's personally been to have Chrome and to have Firefox as alternatives to Microsoft. I mean, remember the day when we were excited that Internet Explorer was available for Mac, and we've come a long way with that. So I think this is something to watch, and it's just, I don't know, it's the hostility in the computing environment is hard to understate today. And so it is definitely smart for us in school technology offices, as well as for us at home, to be looking at security and on a very practical level, looking at things that are easy to update, right? I am the IT guy for our family, and where I'm not going to make everyone have a Chromebook, but it sure as a heck is, a lot easier from an updating standpoint. And I'm thankful with iOS devices that seems to be pretty easy as well. So I know you guys are, I'm sure, advocates for the open web. So it may be something to pay attention to and see where that goes. I think we need to do Geeks of the Week, gentlemen. It is almost the top of the hour. So Jason, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll just share a quick one. It feels like I'm turning into the guy that talks about tech deals guy, but just a shout out to and I've forgotten the name, the Gawker properties, which I can't remember who they're owned by, but Lifehacker and other names. Jezebel is another one of them. They have about 10 blogs that are, part of their network, and they have a commerce team that is particularly gifted sniffing out pretty amazing deals, particularly on Amazon. And so deals.kinja.com is their deals blog. And if you're looking for an SSD drive, if you're looking for charging cables, if you're looking for jeans, if you're looking for cheaper laptops, for the kids, whatnot, that's a great place to go. And there's rarely anything that I've needed to purchase that I haven't waited a couple of days and they haven't featured a deal somewhere to make that happen. So deals.kinja.com.
All right. Hey, Ben, how about yours?
All right. So the problem of practice that I was talking about earlier was essentially, how do you translate text on iOS? On Chrome browsers, there's whole bunches of extensions that will do translation fairly automatically, but on iOS, there's lots of copying and pasting and things like that. So I thought about it for a while and came up with a workflow using the app Workflow that Apple just bought, but that has been in existence for a number of years. And I made a video just talking through where essentially you can highlight any text in any app in iOS. You hit the share button and choose the workflow. It will translate that text to any language you might like. And then if you want, you can have it speak it to you. So you can have the text to speech as well. So just a really nice for our language learners. And that was a lot of fun to sort of try and figure out. And then the only other recommendation I was going to make is, if you are really interested in privacy and security, if you want, I know this is the EdTech Situation Room. If you want that podcast, it's called Contrafabulous, from Audrey Waters and the API Evangelists. So Hack Education and API Evangelists, they are pretty far left of the spectrum, but they talk about education and APIs and privacy all of the time. And so if that's the podcast you want, Contrafabulous.
Awesome. And my Geek of the Week is also a podcast. I mentioned it earlier, but it is the MacCast podcast. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff. If you're a Mac geek, then this is the podcast for you. Adam, who's the host, covers all kinds of things as far as Mac trends and rumors. But this latest May 13th episode is the one where he was talking about the possibilities of the Apple Assistant device and what that might mean for continuity, etc. And then I put a link to Pocket Cast, which I think Jason uses as well, and that's available for Android and iOS and is still my favorite podcatcher. So we are at the top of the hour. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Ooh, look at that. I have a note that says performance reduced. Closing Google Chrome may help your Mac cool down. So we have just been heating up the machine tonight, and we are usually not quite this hot, but we're usually here on Wednesday nights, and we would invite you to join us live. We are typically at let's see if I can get this right. 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, or 7 p.m. Pacific. And we want to thank Peggy for joining us, our 12th man, Ben Wilkoff, for jumping in and adding, especially to the dialogue about Google I.O., but all things EdTech. And I forgot, I think the last time I hosted, to give everyone a chance. So let's just kind of go around the horn again. Tell us where we can find you and where you are sharing more ideas and links. Jason, we'll go to you, and then Ben and I'll close it out.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I blog for the Northwest Council for Computer Education at blog.ncc.org. And I am a proud member, my organization is a proud member of the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, because state virtual schools get things done.
I like that statement. I'm Ben Wolkoff, BHWILKOFF on Twitter, and Learning is Change on my blog.
All right, and I am Wes Fryer, W. Fryer on Twitter, speedofcreativity.org, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please let us know. There is a link that has been not used too much, but is in our show notes, to a listener survey. You can follow us on Twitter at EdTechSR, and that's where you can find out when we do change times, or for some reason just have a different plan. But usually we're here on Wednesday nights. We'd love for you to join us live. Check out the links on edtechsr.com/links. And until next time, stay safe and stay savvy. Good night, everyone.